Where's your emergency?
Ma'am, I'm fishing in Whiskey Bay, and I just found a dead body. It's floating right now. It's caught in between branches.
It's a quiet, serene setting now, but near Whiskey Bay is where a fisherman who happened to be in the area noticed a body. The Iberville Parish Sheriff's Office got the call.
April 23, 2016 started like any other day for a local fisherman out on the waters of Iberville Parish, Louisiana. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft glow over the quiet morning. He was focused on his lines, hoping for a good catch. But something unusual caught his eye, a strange shape floating near the water's edge. At first, he wasn't sure what it was. Curiosity got the better of him, so he brought his boat closer. What he saw left him frozen in shock.
When I rolled about it, I could see her face and neck. It was unbelievably bruised, black, blue, green, and I knew that I said, uh-oh, this is not a classical drowning. His body was dead before it hit the water.
She was naked, bruised, and partially submerged in the murky water. Her injuries were unmistakable. This wasn't some tragic accident. Whoever she was, someone had hurt her in the worst way possible. The fisherman didn't waste a second. He grabbed his phone and called 911. She had her whole life ahead of her. That night, she was supposed to be at work. No one could have imagined the terrible truth of what had happened. At first, investigators were at a loss. Elizabeth had no obvious enemies, but what stood out the most in the investigation was a 5-year-old girl, a child who had seen too much for her young age. Her words would become key in unraveling the events of that fateful night and bringing justice for Elizabeth. When the police arrived, it became clear that the water held more than just her lifeless body. It held the key to a violent and devastating story. Her body showed clear signs of trauma, enough to confirm they were dealing with a homicide. Investigators worked quickly. They retrieved her body from the water and tried to figure out where she had come from. Eventually, they got an ID. Her name was Elizabeth Farrell. She was only 28 years old and lived in Humble, Texas, a suburb just outside Houston, more than 250 miles away from where her body had been found. Elizabeth was a mother of 2 young children, a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old, who would now grow up without their mom. She was married to Jonathan Alley, a man who should have been her partner and protector, but would soon become a key figure in the unfolding nightmare. Detectives needed answers, and they needed them fast. The autopsy results came back, and the findings were nothing short of chilling. Whoever did this hadn't just killed her. They'd unleashed all their fury on her. Each clue brought them closer to understanding what happened, but it also raised more questions. All right, now at this point, the focus quickly shifted to her husband, Jonathan Alley. At first glance, he seemed like the grieving father of their 2 young daughters, but something about his reaction made detectives pause. It wasn't shock or heartbreak that came through in his voice. It was something harder to place. It was calm, too calm for someone who had just been told his wife was found dead.
Hey, Jonathan, you doing all right, man? My first impression of Jonathan, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. Nothing out of the ordinary from what someone who would lose a loved one should look like, but he appeared to be very disheveled.
The detectives broke the news to Jonathan, explaining that Elizabeth's body had been discovered in Louisiana, miles from their home in Texas. His response wasn't what they expected. Instead of panic or devastation, he seemed more confused. He wanted to know why Elizabeth was in Louisiana.
Do you know Elizabeth Farrell? I said, that's the mother of my children. I said, well, look, we have found her here in our parish in Louisiana, and I hate to tell you, but she is deceased. I think his words to me was, where? I said, Louisiana. Well, what is she doing over there? You know, like, that's why I'm calling you.
That was his first reaction. Not sadness, not outrage, just questions. And the lack of emotion wasn't lost on anyone. Detectives immediately felt uneasy. Something about Jonathan didn't sit right. When they asked about Elizabeth's disappearance, he kept his composure in a way that felt unnatural, like he was holding back, or maybe didn't care. He explained that the last time he saw her was on April 21st, 2016, 2 days before her body was found. Jonathan told investigators he had been at home with their 2 daughters that night. According to him, the only time he left the house was briefly to pawn an item for some cash and then went back to the bank to deposit a check. He claimed she had a habit of disappearing for a while, and that's why he didn't seem particularly concerned about her being missing. But the more detectives listened, the more they doubted his story. There was no urgency in his words, no sign of someone desperate to find his wife. They couldn't ignore how detached he seemed. That kind of indifference usually meant one thing: he knew more than he was letting on.
But officers were able to verify that Jonathan had made his way to a pawn shop and did cash a check that belonged to Elizabeth. So everything he's telling officers seems to be true.
The investigation didn't stop with Jonathan. The tension in their home extended beyond the couple. Elizabeth's friends had shared stories about Jonathan's grandmother, Gail, who reportedly had a deep dislike for Elizabeth. Their relationship was rocky at best. Friends said Gail's hostility towards Elizabeth often caused trouble in the house.
I know they were strained because one of the last times I got to hang out with Liz, she spent time complaining about the way his grandmother was treating her. She didn't seem to want Liz there anyway.
I could definitely tell you that Liz felt trapped. She lived with Jonathan, the babies, and Gail.
She said his grandmother didn't like her.
The detectives wondered if Gail's bitterness might have gone further than words. They decided to question her, hoping she might know something that could crack the case wide open. Gail's involvement wasn't far-fetched. Detectives had seen family dynamics like this before, long simmering resentment turning into something far more dangerous. They started asking her about her whereabouts on the day Elizabeth went missing. Was she home? Did she see or hear anything unusual? Every detail mattered, and Gail's answers could either confirm their suspicions or clear her name entirely. As they pieced together the puzzle, one thing became clear: Elizabeth's death wasn't random. It wasn't the work of a stranger. Someone close to her, someone who knew her routines and vulnerabilities, had turned on her. And now the detectives were racing against time to find out who. When detectives first questioned Gail, Jonathan's grandmother, they wanted to know exactly where she had been in the days leading up to Elizabeth's death. Gail told them she had been staying at a campground. They checked her story and followed up with the campground's management. Sure enough, her alibi checked out. She had been there the whole time. The investigators didn't find anything to connect Gail to the crime. Even after searching her house top to bottom, they came up empty. No signs of a struggle. No hidden notes or clues. Not even a trace of Elizabeth's phone or belongings. For now, Gail was ruled out. But something still didn't sit right. The investigators then shifted their focus and started digging into Elizabeth's life outside of her home. They wanted to know if anyone else had seen signs of trouble. That's when they came across Shannon Ferris, one of Elizabeth's closest friends and a co-worker. Shannon knew the side of Elizabeth that others didn't, a woman trying to hold herself together while dealing with a crumbling marriage. What Shannon shared painted a darker picture than anyone expected.
I use this word very harshly, husband.
Are they actually legally married to
They
your
are
knowledge?
Still legally married to my knowledge.
How long have they been married before we get any further?
They were married before they came here, so I'm not sure exactly how long.
So over 5 years?
Yes, sir. She's found him from the synthetic marijuana on occasion. One occasion she told me specifically she found him on the floor, convulsing, I guess, and she stopped it. But at one point in time, he was doing some kind of job and he hurt his hand and had a cast on his hand, and he hit her in the face with it. She had a black eye and it busted both lips and almost busted out 2 front teeth.
From what I gathered from her, Jonathan tended to have a very volatile temper. She always came in with bruises and marks and cuts and stuff like that. She wouldn't let us call the police for her. She begged us not to do any of that kind of stuff.
Elizabeth had confided in Shannon about her relationship with Jonathan. There had been moments of violence years before their youngest child was born. Shannon believed the abuse had stopped, but the memories stayed with Elizabeth. She had told Shannon about the arguments, about Jonathan's drinking, and about how he'd act while watching the kids. Elizabeth felt trapped. Things got so bad that at one point she told Jonathan they were done. She wasn't going to pretend their marriage worked anymore. But there was another side to Elizabeth's story, one detectives hadn't seen coming. She had found comfort in someone else, a man she met online through a shared love of gaming. His name was Jason Swat, and he lived in Oklahoma. What started as casual conversations in a video game turned into something deeper. They built a connection even though they had never met in person. That changed when Jason drove all the way to Texas to meet Elizabeth face to face. Their time together was brief, just a few days while Jonathan was out of the picture. According to Shannon, Elizabeth spoke about how freeing it felt to be with Jason.
Shannon. Oklahoma, she talked with him for a few months prior to him coming down, and then they both wound up being sick the 4 days that she had off to meet him. So she never talked to me about him at all.
She didn't say anything about being intimate with him?
Not with him. The only one I know of that she was ever intimate with was, the Oklahoma guy, yes. She did say they had one that Monday that they were together. It was a wonderful day, and yes, she was intimate with him because she was feeling much relief after.
The detectives now had a new lead, Jason. They needed to find out if this man who had stepped into Elizabeth's life so suddenly had any connection to her death. When they tracked Jason down, he didn't shy away from answering their questions. He admitted to having a romantic relationship with Elizabeth. He told them about meeting her in person and spending a night together at a hotel. Detectives dug into his alibi. They checked his phone records, tracked his movements, and verified every detail. Jason had been in Oklahoma at the time of Elizabeth's murder. There was no way he could have been involved. He was ruled out as a suspect. With Jason cleared, the focus shifted back to Elizabeth's life in Texas. The detectives couldn't ignore what Shannon had told them about the tension in her marriage, the history of abuse, and the fights. They knew the truth was somewhere in the tangled web of Elizabeth's relationships. But even as the pieces started coming together, the questions only grew. Who was capable of committing such a brutal crime? With Jason cleared, the spotlight stayed firmly on Jonathan. His story still had too many holes, and detectives couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. Early on, they asked him if he'd been to Louisiana recently. Jonathan claimed it had been a long time since he'd set foot there, but there was something in his tone, something that made them press further.
When I first interviewed Jonathan, I remember asking specifically if he had ever been to Louisiana, because if Jonathan was our suspect, the one thing we needed to do was lock him into that statement. He told us that it had been a long time since he had ever been to Louisiana.
But recent? No. I was the first person to take her to New Orleans. Let me ask you another question. Have you ever hit her? Yeah. One time. That was the night I stopped drinking.
That was absolutely not the truth.
He brushed it off like it was no big deal, but his demeanor, calm and composed in a way that didn't fit the situation, sent up red flags. Jonathan kept insisting he had nothing to do with Elizabeth's death. The detectives weren't convinced. Every indicator, every little slip in his story pointed to a man who wasn't telling the whole truth. The evidence piled up until there was enough to take action.
Less than a week after 29-year-old Elizabeth Farrell's body was found in Whiskey Bay, a huge break in the case, with Iberville Parish Sheriff's deputies arresting her husband, 28-year-old Jonathan Christopher Ali, pinning him with the grisly crime.
Through some electronic cameras, video, and his own words, we have brought it down and we have enough to arrest him for second-degree murder.
They arrested Jonathan and charged him with Elizabeth's murder. Even as they booked him, he remained disturbingly composed. He invoked his right to a lawyer without hesitation, barely flinching as he signed the paperwork. But the investigators weren't done. They needed more than circumstantial evidence to close this case. Then they made a bold decision. They reached out to the one person who might hold the answers, Jonathan's 5-year-old daughter, Rowan. It was a delicate situation. The detectives brought in specialists from the Children's Assessment Center, professionals trained to speak with kids in difficult circumstances. The little girl didn't know much about what had happened to her mother, but as the conversation continued, she revealed details that turned the case upside down.
First, when we were about to get in the car, then Daddy said, we're going to go on a big adventure, and I didn't want to, but we did it anyway.
Where was your mom whenever you guys went on your road trip?
She was somewhere else.
She was somewhere else? How do you know she was somewhere else?
Because Mom wasn't in the car with us.
Her words were innocent, but they painted a disturbing picture of what happened the night Elizabeth disappeared. She mentioned her father talking about a man named Brad, someone he thought Elizabeth spent too much time with. Rowan said her father didn't like it when her mom spent time with Brad. The tension in the room grew as she shared more about what she remembered.
When you got things out of the back of the car, where were you?
I was still in my car seat. Me and Autumn was still in our car seats.
And where was the car parked at?
At the middle of the road.
At the middle of the road? Okay.
He didn't get run over because Dad's very careful.
So when he stopped in the middle of the road, did you see what he got out of the car?
No.
Okay. Did you see what it looked like?
No.
No? Okay. And when he gets out of the car, was it light or dark out?
Dark.
Oh, it was dark. Okay. Were there any, what were you able to see outside?
Bunch of places.
When he stopped in the middle of the road, what did you see around you?
Rowan described a drive that lasted 3 hours. She said her sister, a baby, was in a bouncer in the back seat. It was dark, and they couldn't find their way home. She said they stopped in the middle of the road, and her dad got out of the car. He opened the trunk and grabbed something. She saw her father throw something down the bridge to the river. She couldn't see what it was, but the way she described it sent chills through the investigators. Detectives knew what she couldn't say outright. The details lined up too well. The 3-hour drive, the dark road, her father getting out to retrieve something from the trunk. It all pointed to one thing. Jonathan had disposed of Elizabeth's body that night, and he'd brought his children along for the ride. Rowan's memory of where they started their journey was another piece of the puzzle. She said they left from their grandmother's house. Her mom wasn't there. She thought Elizabeth might have been at work, or maybe at another family member's house. But the truth was more horrifying than she could imagine. Elizabeth wasn't at work. She wasn't visiting anyone. She was in the trunk of that car. The investigators were horrified. They believed Jonathan had driven to the bridge that night, stopped in the middle of the road, and thrown Elizabeth's lifeless body into the water below. The fact that he brought his 2 daughters along only made it worse. It was a level of coldness that shocked even the most seasoned detectives. Rowan's innocent recollections became the key to unraveling the truth. Her words gave the investigators the confirmation they needed. Now it was a matter of finding justice for Elizabeth, a young mother who had trusted the wrong person and paid the ultimate price. Detectives knew they needed hard evidence to connect Jonathan to Elizabeth's murder, and the search led them to surveillance footage. The area around Whiskey Bay, where Elizabeth's body was found, became the focus. They combed through hours of video footage from cameras along Interstate 10, looking for anything that might place Jonathan there. His car, a gray 2015 Nissan Versa, became the key. It didn't take long for their efforts to pay off. A sharp-eyed detective spotted the car on footage from the night of April 21, 2016. The vehicle was unmistakable, a small gray sedan with an American flag sticker on the rear window. The license plate confirmed it. That car belonged to Jonathan and had been driven more than 4 hours from his home in Texas to the very place where Elizabeth's body was discovered. The evidence was clear. That car hadn't gotten there by accident. As the pieces of the puzzle started coming together, the case took an unexpected turn. On May 18, 2016, a jail inmate came forward with a chilling story. He had been housed in the same unit as Jonathan in Harris County Jail. According to the inmate, Jonathan had confessed to killing Elizabeth. The details he shared were horrifying and left no doubt about the brutality of the crime. Jonathan had told the inmate how it all began.
He was very detailed, and it was a storyline to him. It's like this is how he laid it out to me.
Jonathan told him that Elizabeth was in the shower, the kids were home, and Jonathan had begun looking in Elizabeth's phone, and he found some messages that Elizabeth had been texting another guy. But the message was very explicit, raunchy, he called it, and that those messages enraged Jonathan. Jonathan told the informant that when Elizabeth came out of the shower, he put her in a chokehold and he began to strangle her until she fell to the floor.
He said, I squeezed so tight, I squeezed and squeezed and squeezed until there was no more. He thinks he's already killed her. Okay. He said, then this woman made a, she's trying to come back. She asked him for air. He said he runs over there and he takes his foot and he jumps up and he stomps it on her throat. He don't know what to do, so he stomped her on her throat to try to kill her.
But Jonathan's rage didn't end there. According to his confession, Elizabeth tried to get back up, but he ran over and stomped on her throat. He didn't stop until he was sure she was dead. The inmate's account was graphic and matched the autopsy findings perfectly. The trauma to Elizabeth's neck and chest lined up with what Jonathan had described. The confession didn't stop with her murder. What Jonathan did next was almost as horrifying as the act itself. He then stuffed Elizabeth's body into a Christmas tree bag and drove to Whiskey Bay, where he dumped her into the water, thinking the current would carry away the evidence. But the water didn't erase his crime. It only delayed justice. As detectives continued to dig, they uncovered more damning evidence. Jonathan had pawned several of Elizabeth's belongings shortly after she disappeared, including her Xbox. He had told investigators she took it when she left, but the pawn records told a different story. It wasn't just her belongings he was after. Detectives learned about a life insurance policy in Elizabeth's name. With mounting debts and 2 young daughters to care for, it seemed Jonathan saw her death as a way out. The picture became painfully clear. Jonathan wasn't a grieving husband. He was a man who had planned and carried out a horrific act, and then tried to cover his tracks. Even neighbors recalled hearing fights in the days leading up to Elizabeth's disappearance. Every new piece of evidence tightened the noose around him. In March 2019, Jonathan was extradited to Louisiana to face trial. But in a surprising turn, he opted for a plea deal, admitting to second-degree murder. By pleading guilty, he avoided a trial that could have exposed even more of the darkness lurking beneath the surface. He was sentenced to 35 years in prison, a long time, but not nearly long enough for the cruelty and pain he inflicted. Jonathan's actions destroyed more than one life. Elizabeth's 2 daughters were left without their mother. Her friends and family were left with questions that could never fully be answered. The case revealed the devastating impact of jealousy and rage, and how far some people will go to hide their sins. Even as the case came to a close, the scars it left behind remained. Elizabeth's story became a tragic reminder of how quickly love can turn to hate, and how dangerous unchecked anger can be. Justice was served, but the cost was immeasurable.